What's going on, everyone? Back for another edition of the Club and Sub podcast. I will be taking over the hosting duties for our boy John. So you got myself and my boy Danny Lags for episode number 109. As always, this podcast is brought to you guys by betonline.ag. You can head over there and use the code Club Sub for a promo on your first deposit bonus as well. They're one of the best offshores out there for MMA, getting all your regional stuff in there. We got Invicta going on right now, a lot of props. They've even added the points handicaps and all that fun stuff, which I love as well. So if you guys are not on there, be sure to head over there and check them out. That's betonline.ag. Use that promo code Club Sub. And we are kind of getting into another fun card where unfortunately we have another break week after this, and then we get into a pretty hot run towards the end of the year. But nonetheless, we got to come out here and break it down. What are you thinking about the card, Legs?
Honestly, for me, I think this fight card can just be summed up in one word, and it's just violence. I think a ton of these fights are going to finish inside the distance, or else I'm going to be losing a lot of money tracked. So I guess we'll see.
All right. Well, I think we'll be starting off one that I think you might have some betting interest in that might bring a little bit of violence according to the Tapology, going bottom to top. We got Randy Costa versus Guido, the guy who might potentially be getting a discount at the car wash now for how old he is, Canetti. Let me know what your thoughts are, Legs.
Yeah, so one of my bigger plays on the card, I got a unit and a half on the under 1.5 rounds, minus 140. I think as long as this fight lasts, it's going to be a war. I mean, people will look at the last fight with Tony Kelly and be like, oh, Lags, that went over 1.5 rounds, but like Tony Kelly's not really much of a finishing threat on the feet. It was more of like a accumulation KO. Whereas Guido, ton of power on the feet, huge body kicks, solid leg kicks as well, I think, which will be money in the bank here because Randy's staying super front heavy on that front leg. But yeah, I expect violence here for as long as this lasts.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting one when you got a guy, I'd always classify, who's a massive favorite at minus 300, who's only won a fight past 2 minutes. It's pretty crazy. And I don't know if you bet it or John bet it, but personally, I thought one of my favorite cashes of the entire year was on Tony Kelly at plus 275 over, or not plus 175 over Randy Costa, just because of that general dynamic. You had the cardio of Tony Kelly, you had the volume of Tony Kelly, you had the grappling of Tony Kelly. And I was just super stoked about that. Bringing it to this one, I do still think there is some slight merit to Canetti if he comes out here and shoots takedowns early, at least in terms of like a minute winning perspective. He's shown he can do it in some fights, but the reality is the homeboy hasn't wrestled in his last 3 fights, so it's a little difficult for him to bank on doing that. But just touching back on that Kelly fight, Kelly going to the clinch, I think, was a component of the success he was able to have there, at least in terms of sapping the gas of Randy Costa too. So I do think that's a potential path for Canetti in terms of being a live underdog. But even with Costa not winning a fight past, 2 minutes, I think he's just much bigger. He's much more explosive, obviously more youthful. Canetti really struggles with effective pressure. He kind of just succumbs to it. He kind of plays the outside, and the credence to Canetti is outside of some of his general overall equity is when he goes forward. He throws everything into every single one of his shots. He's got those big body kicks, those big hooks, those big overhands, and there's a lot of similar parallels there too to Randy Costa. But Randy Costa is going to be the guy going forward against a guy who struggles with that pressure. Where, like I said, Canetti, if you told me that Canetti fought in a more consistent work rate, I honestly be all over him here, but he just doesn't. It's just so blitz and burst heavy. Coupled with the fact that he's old as shit, I don't really trust him as far as I can throw him. I know a lot of people have referenced the Mana Martinez fight, but if you go back and watch that fight, obviously with Martinez being a historic power threat, Martinez did fuck of nothing, through the first 7.5 minutes of that fight and just kind of let Canetti kick him and pot shot him and all that stuff. Is that was perfect for Guido. No pressure, no wrestling, no overt power dynamic. If the person's not going to throw strikes, and Canetti, went out there and looked decent early, but that's just not Randy Costa. I mean, if it is, and he makes some adjustments or some changes, so be it. It's MMA, anything can happen. But historically, Randy Costa is going to go out there and get after guys, and I think that's probably a nightmare for Canetti, and he probably gets knocked out. So I think you probably have a decent look on the unders, but from a money line perspective, I think it's completely Canetti or pass. just because at least he's shown that he can, win decisions in the UFC. At the same time, where we just don't know what Randy Costa looks like out of the first round. That's just the reality of the situation. So I think that's a decent look there, Legs. Then we got Julija Stolyarenko taking on my girl, Chelsea Chandler. I'll kick this one off. A bit biased. I've been in the Chandler camp for a second, been talking to her for like the last 2 or 3 years. I said this girl's going to get to the UFC, so it always feels vindicating when you have a regional person that you're talking about. He's saying, yeah, I think they're going to get to the UFC, and eventually one day they do. So, like I said, a bit biased here from like a matchup perspective. I think the fight being lined like a pick is fair. I think both girls have advantages in multiple rounds. I think Chandler is more consistent to come forward. She's got that southpaw look. She's got those big straight lefts. I think her optics are better. She's shown to go to cage push, which we know that Stolyarenko has struggled with. Kunitskaya stuck her there for pretty much all of 50 minutes. I also think that Chandler is a featherweight through and through, where I think Julija is a bantamweight. So I do think there are physicality advantages that favor Chandler. But what favors Stolyarenko, obviously, strength of competition, battle-tested nature, right? She's fought a lot of good girls, and, she's had some success, right? She had Alexis Davis in that armbar in the first round. She had some success striking in the second round against Davis. She had some striking success against Julia Vila in the second round, right? And then obviously she goes out there and and dumps JRC early and armbars her. But I mean, historically, that's like my thing in this matchup. Like, Stolyarenko is a shit wrestler, like for a large sample size, right? She's like had these moments where she hit that takedown against Rose Clark. She hit the one against Avila, in which Avila reversed her immediately too, I might add. But she's just not a good wrestler. We just don't have a long enough sample size to sit there and say she's a good wrestler. She's a bottom player. She's a bottom player, guard sub type of girl. Can she guard sub Chelsea Chandler? Potentially. I'm more so on the side of no. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. But Chandler been a Cesar Gracie purple belt for a second now. I don't think she's necessarily going to get caught off a reactionary takedown like the Jessica Rose Clark scenario and get armbarred that way. I don't necessarily think she gets armbarred from guard. I'd be honestly more concerned from the capacity of Chandler like losing position from top or getting swept, and then that's how Stolyarenko gets on top. Then I think there's some significant merit to her. But yeah, I think it's a variable fight. I think there's solid arguments to be both made both ways. I can understand bets on both sides. I can understand picks on both sides. I'm going to side with my girl, Chelsea Chandler, who a lot of people, at least from a picking perspective, are not giving a lot of respect to. But this line hasn't really moved all that much, at least recently. Chandler did open a minus 150 favor. The market came in. I think that makes sense. But like right now, we're seeing it kind of blimp back and forth either way, right around that pick 'em price tag. So obviously the market isn't super strong on one opinion at this point. What do you think, Legs?
So I will have a contrarian opinion here, and I guess I guess for starters, I will say like the betting line probably isn't moving because like Stolyarenko for the most part, like all of her wins have been inside the first round. I mean, there's just not a ton of proven capacity of her over 15 minutes. Not a great minute winner. Her standing isn't that great, but like Chandler, for the most part, hasn't fought that great girls, in my opinion. Like the regionals, not that great. Her boxing, decent. Cage push, don't get me wrong. She's a much bigger girl. I think that there's merit there. I just think Stolyarenko at some point probably can find a submission. Like I just don't trust the IQ of Chandler, to be honest. But no interest in betting the fight.
That's fair, though. I mean, that seems to be the common opinion, though, and that's why I think it's kind of
like I guess my advice would be if you like Stolyarenko, just play the sub. It's plus 300.
But I guess let's talk about this for 2 seconds though, right, too. Like if this is such a quasi big step up in competition, if you're on the Stolyarenko side taking the strength of competition notion of the fight heavily, which like I said makes sense. I'm just devil's advocate to that other side, right, in trying to get in the head of those people's opinions. If you're doing that though, at a pick 'em price tag, isn't there a chance though that she's just the better striker or she's the better wrestler and she just goes out there and wins a decision? Like
it could be. I just don't have a ton of indication myself because like the sample size really isn't there.
True.
So
That's
like
fair.
laying juice in the spot is just like, I don't know, kind of a little wishing hopeful.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm still kind of on the other
Yeah.
side though. I think at if you like Stolyarenko, even at Pick'em, because there is a chance where this is just too big of a step up for her, right? Stolyarenko has competed with better girls, right?
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Chandler's just tough as shit. I mean, and then she can't get finished. And then everyone out there's holding plus 300 sub tickets when Stolyarenko goes out there and 30-27s her or cleanly 29-28s, and everyone's like shooting themselves in the head. It's a pick 'em price, man. Like, I don't know. To me,
Yeah.
if you're getting a pick 'em price on somebody, I'd say play the money. I mean, if you want to play both, I think that's fine. But I would say hold off of just only playing the sub. Like, I mean, if you think this is a winnable fight for Stolyarenko at pick 'em, then you have to think she's at least 60%. So you should be playing that money line too. That's just my opinion. But all right, we spent a lot of time on that fight.
No, you're good. I just don't have a strong opinion on that side personally.
Yeah, like I said, neither do I. I'm picking Chandler to win, but I don't have any supreme degree of confidence. I'm just kind of being a bit of a homer there too. But I do think she has some thoughts in that fight. All right, let's move it on to a fight that I don't necessarily think is the most interesting one in the world either. We got Maxine Grishin versus Felipe Lins. What do you think your legs?
Again, another one. I don't have like a strong take, but I do have a small bet here. I got a unit on Grishin at minus 150. I think he's just a more technical striker, to be completely honest. And I don't think Lins can mix in the grappling at all. I know he showed that off in his last fight against Pragnell, but he's one of the worst guys to ever do it in 205 pounds. So I think this is a solid spot for Grishin.
Yeah, I was kind of an early mover on it too. I took Grishin, I think, at like minus 150, about 10-ish or so days ago. And I'm not the hugest proponent of Maxine Grishin, right? Like I'm not a huge fan of his volume. He's not necessarily the most consistent wrestler in the world. And so usually like these tepid type of guys, at like middling type of price tags, I'm always like pretty cautious about. But I mean, just going back and looking at Felipe Lins, historically, Maxine Grishin's fight style is a poor architect for Felipe Lins, right? The range kickboxers in Arlovsky gave him trouble. The range kickboxer in Tanner Boser gave him trouble. And even going back and watching Pragnell, bro, Pragnell won the first round off of this guy. Like, Pragnell ain't nothing special, right? And largely, Lins, winning that fight was a product of Pragnell just, gassing, right? And he couldn't finish Pragnell either, which is also interesting, right?
Which I think also because he slowed down quite a bit too.
Exactly, and I think that's an interesting component, right? Because I mean, even with the narrative on Pragnell, kill, at least in relation to him getting deaded. I was someone who was holding an under 2.5 ticket in that fight, ready to pull my hair out because Felipe Lins did hurt him on a few occasions. But what did he do when he hurt him? He just went to the clinch, right? It's one of my biggest pet peeves in capping and watching MMA. After you hurt someone, why would you go to the clinch with them? Like, that's what they want. They want a time to rest, break, and just, I hate that shit. I'm sorry. I hate it so much personally and for my bet that lost that night. But to your point, I think Grishin is just a much better technical kickboxer. I think he's got better defensive capabilities, better hardware. He held Justin Jacoby to like 63 significant strikes, which dropped his like historic volume components by about 35%. Pretty impressive to me. Lins, I don't know. Like, I think him down at 205 is like technically his rightful weight class based on his size, but his historic credence up at heavyweight was that he was just faster than all these guys. And I don't necessarily know if that's the case. And if he was able to push a more consistent work rate at range, I'd have more issues, but that's not really the case. My primary concern comes honestly with cage push because we've seen Grishin get stuck against the fence in a couple contests in the past. But I think minute to minute range exchange wise, I think it's a decent look for Maxine Grishin as well. So on to our next one, we got Brendan Hall and Allen taking on Krzysztof Jotko. I think this is an okay spot for Jotko with assuming he fights how he has historically, right? He's kind of a lower volume point fighter. He doesn't really deviate from that much, but he will mix in the wrestling. And I think that's an interesting component of this fight too, as Brendan Allen stuffs takedowns like shit. His defensive wrestling is no good. His offensive wrestling is no good. And we just saw, Jocko shoot a healthy amount of takedowns, look fine in the guard of GM3, who's, one of the best submission artists, at middleweight, at least in terms of subs. Not many people can say that, and be fine in the guard of GM3, at least in terms of not getting subbed or not getting swept or something of that nature. So Jocko can defensively grapple, obviously not much of an offensive grappling threat, but he can wrestle. And we just saw Jacob Malkoun go out there and rack up, a healthy amount of minutes. We've seen Brendan Allen stuck on bottom for extended minutes in multiple contests. So I think that's a path for Jocko in this fight also to not get subbed. And I just think that slow tactical point fighting based game he plays on the feet is going to give Allen a lot of issues. Allen does have a volume advantage in this fight. I think Allen's striking offensive acumen has improved, but I don't think he's going to sit there and be able to land with impunity like he has on guys in the past. I know people reference his fight with like Punahele Soriano and how good he looked in that fight. And I concede the fact that he looked really good in that fight, but Puna is a come forward power puncher who sets nothing up, who has no footwork, no head movement. So I don't really understand that comparison. Like, oh, he went out there and outstruck Punahele Soriano. At the time, yes, it was impressive, more so in relation to him not getting knocked out, because that's what the general consensus was. But Punahele Soriano is not a technical kickboxer in any stretch of the imagination. Chris Jocko is, and he's proven that over a long sample size. So I think homeboy Jocko can kind of nullify some of that volume as well from Allen, and I think he can probably just kind of pot shot him a bit from the outside, mixing opportunistic takedowns in a couple rounds when he needs to, and win this fight on the cards. What do you think, Legs?
Yeah, originally like coming out of tape and seeing the line like around like minus 135, minus 140, like slowly creeping up, I wasn't too interested. But now the line was kind of coming back down, I'm kind of right there with you, to be completely honest. I have a small play in Jocko minus 120. Like on the feet, Allen's a punching bag, to be completely honest. He's definitely improved his striking for sure, but I don't think it's quite there. And I think in general, Jocko's a tough puzzle to crack. Like you're talking about, good footwork, solid technical striker, and I think he's just a tough guy to hold down and get down. So I think it should be a good fight for Jocko. I think optically he's not it's not the best striking, so that's why I'm kind of keeping the play fairly small, but I think it should be a good spot for him.
Yeah, and that's kind of the last thing I want to hit him before we move on is like Jocko's not an easy guy to look good against, right? Like how many guys go out there and, volume up Jocko or Russell fuck Jocko? Like
very couldn't.
Yeah, pretty much nobody. Like I know he's gotten bonked a few times, but it, was a handful of years back and, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I disagree. Like with it being a pick'em price tag, like should you heavily favor Jocko? No, but like minus 120, I think he's like 65%. So I think you're getting a little meat on the bone there with Mr. Jocko. So, all right, on to a fight that honestly I have really no overt read on, or not a great read on at least. We got Neto BJJ Joaquim Silva taking on Jesse Ronson. What do you think, Legs?
So I actually do have a decent sized play here. I got a unit and a half on the under 2.5 rounds, minus 110. I think both of these guys can crack on the feet. They've shown defensive irresponsibility as well. I think both of these guys could lock up a submission as well if it hits the mat. Ronson, just talking narrative perspective,
Plus 105.
All right. My voice options. Sorry about that. But yeah, I guess to talk real quick. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. To talk narrative real quick about Ronson in the last fight, like he did not look good at all, to be completely honest. I know he's coming off PEDs, just looks slow, not himself. I think this is a violent fight, to be completely honest. So I think Pick'em didn't make a ton of sense. I love that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to go with it. I think probably Ronson's the side is the dog, just because Silva, despite his, jiu-jitsu background, he doesn't really wrestle much. So, we'll see. I still with Silva getting knocked out in his last couple fights, it really just has not looked overtly pretty at the same time. You touched on Ronson, coming off the PED suspension, looking horrible as someone who had a bet on Jesse Ronson in that fight too. Also, it was another fight back down at 155 that he hadn't fought in a second, or at least at that weight class in a second. So I don't know if, him at a new weight class, has anything to do with that either. So I think it's a pretty variable fight, but yeah, I'd probably look to Ronson as the dog, or Violence is probably the best spot out there. So, all right, we're going to move on to my main event of the evening. We got Jessica Penne taking on the Baby Shark, Tabitha Ricci. Your boy got the merch on tonight. You all know, if you've been listening to this podcast, I've been a Ricci truther over the years. I don't have an official Finn hat. I don't think I'm going to get that marky crazy with it, but I did support Homegirl with some merch. I've cashed on all 3 of Ricci's bets in the UFC, or I'm sorry, Ricci's fights in the UFC so far. Hit the under 2.5 in the Fioro fight, and then I hit Ricci on her money line in her last 2 fights, taking on the Grizzled Bet and Jessica Penne. Yeah, I think it's a decent spot for Ricci. I think she's more willing to come forward. She's more willing to be active. Obviously, is she, Israel Adesanya out there on the feet? No, no, she's not. But I think her general aggression and output, at least in relation to where she's at right now, has proven credence to some of her striking success to date. Penne, despite being the much bigger girl in this fight, does not use her length effectively at all, as per, fighting a very small girl in Emily Ducote, who landed over 100 significant strikes on her. Daniel Taylor is 5 feet tall, if you remember that fight back in the day, landed on her with pretty cleanly and consistently and cleanly at the same time. So it's not as if Jessica Penne, despite her being long, can not be outstruck by smaller girls. Yes, she can be. I guess even if you factor in Jessica Andrade, but that's not really fair because it's Andrade and beat the living shit out of her. Nonetheless, she can be outstruck. So I don't really agree with the narrative that, okay, she's this much bigger, that matters from a striking perspective that much. I mean, she falls into the Mo Green syndrome that I've referenced on this podcast. You can be long, and people talk about it all the time. This person's bigger, this person's longer. It's like, do they use it though? Can they use it? If they can't, I don't want to hear your intangible arguments about shit, because it doesn't matter. They never have been able to use it, and they can't use it. So get that stuff out of my face. At the same time, if you told me this was a 15-minute range kickboxing match, would I feel like great with a over minus 200 ticket on Ricci? No, because she is still hittable at the same time. She is still going to have to close distance. Penne's got a decent clinch game as well, so there's that. But I think Ricci can land takedowns in this fight. Penne stuffs like shit. She's fine to play from her guard. Ricci's obviously a competent black belt to not get caught in some low-level bullshit meme arm bar submission type of scenario. So I think it's kind of Ricci's fight to lose in a lot of way, but at the same time, she still is green. She still has less than 10 pro fights. We've seen this stuff go wrong against vets before, right? So it's hard to sit there and, say lay the mortgage on Mrs. Tabitha Ricci, but I do think she has minute winning capabilities on the feet. I think she has minute winning capabilities on the ground. So I think it's a good spot for Ricci, and potentially send Mrs. Jessica Penne packing. What do you think?
I'll keep it short and sweet. Fully agree with you as well. And I probably would have been an early mover on that line if I would got to the fight, if it was around that minus 150 range, if I got to it earlier. But like minus 200 where it's at now, just no interest.
For sure.
Yeah, it looks like it's creeping around that minus 230 range now. So
is it? Because I know Penne got a little bit of buyback, which pushed it down on some books, but
yeah, looks like the lowest is bet on the line is minus 205.
Gotcha. All right, to round out the prelims, I love this fight and I hate it I love this fight because it's so bad at the same time. We got the boa constrictor Alexei Oleinik at the not so ripe age of 45, who's also one of the fighters on this card, who will be getting the discount at the car wash shortly and cashing in his 401k shortly, if they even have that in Russia. I have no idea if they do. Taking on my favorite guy in the world, but not really, Beefy Latifi is back at heavyweight. What do you think, your legs?
I'm glad this fight's still going on because I love old man Oleinik. Like he's an absolute treasure. Love seeing him fight. But from our betting perspective, there's no way you could trust either of these guys, to be completely honest. I think there's just a ton of narratives on both sides where you can point to, like you mentioned on Oleinik, 45 years old. The guy doesn't have great cardio. On top of that, Latifi, the guy doesn't throw anything. Doesn't do anything at all. So Like maybe you could say the over is a good look here, but Olynyk could also just die. So I have no interest from a betting perspective, but this fight's going to be hilarious.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say off the top is I just hope the fight happens because this is the third time it's being booked. And I'm kind of sick of trying to run them through. It's like, let's just get it over with. Whoever dies, whoever wins, like who cares? Let's move this. Let's just move this one on along UFC. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to have any real strong opinion here. Obviously, Latifi, historic wrestler, going to sit there, lay and prey on guys, poor cardio. My question kind of becomes, does he want to do that with Olynyk, though? Does he want to just sit there in the guard of a guy like Alexei Olynyk? Because honestly, Olynyk, I don't think he's really going to care if he gets taken down in this fight. He's fine to play from his back. We've seen him lock up those Ezekiels from guard, right? At the same time, too. Like, he's fine to play. And then people obviously take the argument that Latifi has no neck, which there might be some merit there. Latifi's never been submitted in his entire pro career. I don't know, like, my interest in this fight, like, honestly, I don't really care about it from a betting perspective. I mean, I think it's completely dog or pass. I'm not laying minus 180 on Latifi, like you said, who does nothing, who's just reliant to lay on people or laying like a big overhand right, which he very well actually could on Olynyk because Olynyk's striking defense and durability is shit, but he doesn't throw strikes. But I completely lost my train of thought where I was going with that one. I was saying, like, I'm just curious to see how Latifi approaches the fight. Like, does he just go old Latifi? I'm just going to wrestle him. I'm fine in the guard. He's like, okay. And he definitely could just grind out Olynyk too, because despite Latifi's gas tank being shit, Olynyk's gas tank is horrible either. One thing I will say, though, is gas tank was better than Fabricio Verdum, and he beat Fabricio Verdum. That's all I'm saying. I always go back to that fight just as kind of a funny reference point. I mean, Fabricio Verdum is just much more skilled than Alexei Olynyk, but he death gassed worse than Olynyk was exhausted in that fight too. But Verdum gassed worse than he did. So is there a scenario where Latifi's looking good for about 6-7 minutes? He gets tired and Olynyk's able to scramble a little bit. He maybe not sweeps, but he's able to shrimp, get to his back, and Latifi's too exhausted to stand up and do it. Like, Olynyk got to Verdum's back, right? Verdum's one of the best black belts in the history of the UFC. My point is that if someone's exhausted, they can't defend themselves. So, like, if Alexei was not 45, I think I would take the shot here because, like I said, I think if you're laying this price on Latifi, you hope he lands the big overhand early, or he's able to just kind of grind Olynyk out in a round that Olynyk's fine to play in. I mean, the guy's got 47 submission wins of 60 wins in his pro career. Do you want to just sit there in that guy's guard for extensive minutes? I don't know. Like I said, maybe he's fine. Who the fuck knows, though? Completely variable fight. Hope it happens so we don't have to talk about it again. But
I guess the last thing I'll add is, like, if you were hypothetically laying like Latifi money line, like, I wouldn't want him to lay in. Like, if I've like, that's the thing. Like, how could you come to the conclusion of laying the money line on Latifi and be like, you know what? I just think you can just grind him out. Like, I think if you're on that side, you'd have to project him to knock him out, kind of thing. Like, I wouldn't be comfortable across 15 minutes. That's just me personally, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an interesting point too, like, because if, let's say I agree with you or agree or not disagree, let's just say that, like, that's the narrative, right? If you're laying 180 on Latifi, hoping he knocks him out, once again, Latifi doesn't throw strikes, so you're laying 65%, hoping he lands the shot, which he very well could, and he lands it in like 1 minute and like easy beefy Latifi money. I cannot wait for those tweets. I kind of hope he knocks him out, and then we see those tweets. I'm like, dude, like, come on, bro, because there are just so many, a wide array of outcomes of how Olynyk could be potentially live here, right? So
yeah,
and even talking through it and doing all my breakdowns, I might end up just taking a small shot on old man Olynyk because I don't know if I can justify beefy Latifi at this price tag necessarily. But if I bet on a 45-year-old man and lose money, I might kill myself. But there's also another spot in this card where I might be laying a small price on another old ass man too, and I might also kill myself there too. So we'll see what I do there. But I think it's completely dog or pass on the money line.
I think I know the fight you're talking about too.
Let's kick off the main card with probably my favorite fight on the card from an entertainment perspective. And I think, the one, shining candle to potentially fight of the night. We got Mike Davis taking on Slava Borchev. Definitely an interesting one for me. Starting off with a little bit of narrative, kind of just curious to see where Mike Davis is at. He's only fought once in the last 3 years. He struggled with some injuries. He struggled with some medical issues. So I'm kind of curious to see just how he looks in being so inactive in that time frame. You can also take the other argument, he's gotten much better. He's going to come out here and look like a killer. So honestly, I don't know from that capacity, just something interesting to know. But obviously with Borchev coming from that highly credentialed kickboxing background, homeboy needs to strike. And historically, it's been the grinding type of game plans that have either took minutes, rounds, or fights off of him. Davis does come from a wrestling background, is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. Question is Davis going to come out here and shoot a high volume of takedowns? That's question number one that I don't know about. If he does, we'll see how that goes. Even if he doesn't shoot a high volume of takedowns and just mixes in the wrestling, does he, D1 Jacasey, homeboy did? I'm not necessarily sure, just because we haven't seen that necessarily from Davis in the past, like extensive control blanket type of game. So, that's obviously his path. Or I should say the clearest path, I should say, in this fight of anything is Davis on the ground, in my opinion, but hard to bank on that. And I think the stand-up's just really interesting. You got Davis as the boxer, I think wins in tight. I think he's more durable, definitely has power. Probably a bit more battle test at this point, but Borchev is pretty good at range. He's a good kicker, obviously has a lot of power, digs the body. Both guys are really poor defensively, but Borchev's durability has been tested a little bit more. He's been hurt in multiple fights where we haven't seen that as much from Davis outside of getting dropped by Sadiq back on Contenders. But yeah, if this is like a 15-minute striking affair, I personally wouldn't feel great about having that price on Davis, and I think Slava's aside, but I think making Davis a favorite makes sense based on his grappling upside. Is it something I want to lay? Absolutely not. So I think it's a decent pass spot. And from some perspective, sometimes, as gamblers, it's nice to kind of have these pass spots on these like most look forward to fight of the night. So like, I don't have to sit there and swallow my bet. I can just sit back, crack a beer, enjoy this one. So yeah, I'm not going to have a cent on this fight, but I think it's going to be an absolute banger. What do you think, bro?
Yeah, so I'm right with you with thinking Davis should be the justified favorite with the grappling upside. I think he's a better technical striker too. And I'm right with you as well with like, do you know if he's going to wrestle or not? But to me, I'd much rather have the under 2.5 rounds. I think this is going to be a violent fight. It's around -110 for the under 2.5. I don't have a plan on it myself, but I think if you were, I'd much rather take that route personally.
That's not bad. I guess I didn't really look at the total that much.
Yeah.
The fight should be fucking chaos.
Yeah,
I guess it could be a trap by the number, like 15-minute war, but like, pick'em's not bad.
Yeah, FanDuel's got the under 2.5 -118. Bet online -130. It's -120-ish for the most part.
Yeah, and it's one of those fights. Like, even if you bet and it loses, like, how mad are you going to be, right?
Right.
Right. They're both going to
Yeah.
sit there and throw hands. You're going to see big moments in the fight, no doubt about it. Like, I'd be shocked if either guy sat there and just stood and stared at each other. Like, I doubt. I guess you could say that, Davis, you kind of just wrestle grinds in that way. But I don't know. I still think Slav will be able to get up at the same time, too. So interesting fight nonetheless. We got another interesting one coming up. We got Sexy Mexi, John Castaneda taking on Daniel Santos. What do you got here, Legs?
I guess even though he is a -190 favorite, I'll play a little contrarian because I think for the most part, most people are on Willie Cat this week. I think it's a decent spot for Castaneda. I like the volume on his side. Got decent footwork. I think he's got solid grappling as well. I'm just not a Santos guy, to be completely honest with you. I think the guy throws way too much spinning shit, slows a bit in fights, at least in my opinion. I don't think he cuts off the cage that well. I think it's a good spot for Castaneda, but I have no interest in laying the chalk myself.
Yeah, I'm more on the Santos side from like a value perspective. Not a strong opinion. I just I just kind of think it was interesting that Castaneda was like a plus 170 dog to Miles Johns. Now he's like over a minus 200 favorite.
Yeah.
I just kind of think there's probably a bit of like market overcorrection there. But yeah, I mean, Castaneda historically has, based on what we've seen from both guys, has the grappling upside in this fight. I'm just not necessarily convinced he holds a guy like Santos down. And, Castaneda's out there having competitive minutes early with Miles Johns, having competitive minutes with 37-year-old washed Eddie Wineland. I think he's a guy who has good cardio, who's tough, and is serviceable. Meaning that's gonna win him fights at the UFC, and obviously it has. I think he's 3-1 in the UFC so far. But I think part of his successes came from his cardio, though. The fact that he's just kind of able to do more than his opponents. And I don't think that's necessarily the case with Santos. I think Santos has really, really good cardio, and I don't think he's going to cardio dump like a Miles Johns or like a Marcelo Rojo. So there's obviously a lot of questions on the kid. Only one fight in the last 3 years, gets butchered by Arce in his debut, but massive step up in competition. That's about as tough a debut as you can get for a guy with only like 11 pro fights at that time. Had some moments in there to boot. So, yeah, I think Santos is the side. I think it's just a bit of a market overcorrection. I'm just not overtly high on Castaneda. Like I said, I value the different things that he does, but Castaneda over 200 just seems a little much to me personally. So on to the next fight. We got Sadiq Youssef versus Don Shainis. I don't think we're going to spend too much time here. I think Shainis has shown some wrestling competency. He's got some power, but I think he's one of those guys that's just going to be kind of a higher level regional fighter. I think he might get maybe some wins in the UFC depending on matchup against some lower tier guys. But coming on 2 weeks' notice against a fringe top 15 guy in Sadiq Youssef, what's his cardio going to be like? Probably not great, right? Obviously, Sadiq's exponentially the best fighter. He's fought by a mile. Should you parlay Sadiq at minus 1,000? No. There's no value on that at all. If anything, I'd say probably look to like the under, which is plus money. I think that's probably the way to go about it. Only concern there is that potentially Shainis could have some wrestling success early to extend minutes, which kind of always gets a little dicey with 1.5s. But yeah, I mean, Sadiq should fuck him up.
Yeah, I think you broke that down perfectly, to be completely honest. I have a unit on the under 1.5 rounds plus 140, and perfect reasoning why I'm keeping it small as well, because I do think there could be some cage pushing for Shainis, but I don't think his wrestling is all that great, to be honest. And I think he's pretty green and hittable standing. I think this should be easy work for Sadiq.
No disagreements for me there. All right, 3 fights to go. We got Raoni Barcelos taking on Trevin Jones. What do you think here, Lex?
Well, if you've been listening to the podcast for any time, you know that we're not much of Trevin Jones guys. He's not much of a minute winner. He's very low volume, fairly KO reliant. I think it should be a good spot for Raoni, but it's also one where, like, at least for me, his inactivity, like in fight, like he's only had pretty much one fight in the past 3 years. I think the Victor Henry fight wasn't a great look either. I think anybody that got like in that early number, I guess that minus 180-ish where it opened, minus 190, but it's looking like it's around minus 230, minus 250 now. Like I have no real interest, just a pass spot for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on Jones well. Low volume, guy who's not going to chuck his hands. He's pretty power reliant. Like he's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but not a great wrestler, not a great grappler by any means. X's and O's wise, I think Barcelos has him covered, to be completely honest. I think it's honestly probably a decent buy low spot on Barcelos where you're looking, to play 3, 4, 5, 600, on Barcelos historically. Like I understand like the Victor Henry fight wasn't a great look, but I think there's 2 things to say with that. One, I think Victor Henry's just a much better fighter than myself or really any of the market anticipated at all. So there's that. 2, Victor Henry threw almost 400 total strikes in that fight. Trevin Jones ain't throwing 400 strikes in a fight. He'll fall the fuck over at 150, right? He does not have that. He just kind of plays the outside and needs that shot. Yes, I understand him knocking out Valiev and Bautista is, those are good wins. If you just look at that on the Capology or the Wikipedia, you're like, oh shit, right? No, those are good wins. Those are good wins on the guy's rap sheet, but it's like you also have to look to how that Valley of fight was going for 80% of it. Jones was on the ropes and might have gotten finished or stopped in a large majority of those scenarios. In the Bautista fight, not a lot happened. He was probably losing up until he landed the kill shot. He's not out wrestling Barcelos. He's not out grappling Barcelos. I'd be shocked. So, yeah, I think he's pretty much KO reliant. But to your point, Barcelos is 35. He will engage in the firefights. His defense can be an afterthought at times. So Jones is going to have opportunities to knock him out here, but I think that's really his sole win condition because I think he's screwed on minutes, really in both realms. And honestly, if Barcelos wanted to go out here and put on a singlet and really get after him in the wrestling, I think Barcelos fucks him up on the ground, to be honest. So I think it's a favorite or pass spot, to be honest with you. Co-main event, we got Randy Rude Boy Brown taking on Masaran Duba, 44-year-old Francisco Trinaldo. I'm not going to lie, I got a little interest on homeboy, the old man Trinaldo here. Just because Trinaldo is a tough guy to look good against historically. He's not a guy that's easy to go out there and just blow out of the water minute to minute, knock out. He's historically, been pretty durable. And despite, being 44, homeboy's 6-2 since he turned 40 years old. So I don't think Trinaldo necessarily falls into the conventional lens of a guy who, he's over 40. He's completely washed. He's completely done. It's like, if that was the case, he would not be 6-2 in his 40s. Like that's just the truth, right? But in the guys in their 40s at the same time, the drop-off point can just really happen at any time. Like you're playing Russian roulette, in that capacity. And what I will say with Trinaldo, a guy who's been very known for his durability historically, he's gotten dropped in 2 of his last 4 fights. That is kind of a sign of regression there, no doubt about it. Brown's obviously a massive 170, Trinaldo historic 155. That's the concern. But the thing with Randy Brown is, despite him being on a good stretch recently, Randy Brown is not the guy you want to trust at -300 against damn near anyone, in my opinion. There's a lot of wishy-washy components of Randy Brown's game. Randy Brown's been hurt in multiple fights. Randy Brown has been in close minute-to-minute exchanges, round-to-round exchanges in a lot of fights where only different scenarios on both sides have been the difference. Randy Brown can get stuck on his back and out-wrestled at times. And the thing with Trinaldo is he has this way to lull his way into close fights. Like he just does. So my overall opinion on the fight, from a betting perspective, if you're laying this type of price on Randy Brown, you have to think he finishes Trinaldo at a pretty sizable clip of his price tag, in my opinion, to justify that. Because to lay -300 on Randy Brown, let alone parlay Randy Brown, which everybody's doing because he's the parlay piece of the week, right? Now he's up to -330, -340 at books. You have to say that he beats Trinaldo 80+% of the time to have any sort of edge or value on your play. And to me, that's fucking insane. It just is. I'm sorry. I don't know, man. Like I said, he goes out there and dusts Trinaldo, kills him. I look like I don't have a bet on it or anything yet because, like I said, I think the money's going to continue to flow in on Brown. And if, Trinaldo gets to +300, I'm probably going to take a small little pop. Just like I said, he's a tough guy to look good against. He's a tough guy to get out of there. Despite him getting hurt, he's not getting knocked out, right? He's tough to submit. 6-2 in his 40s, it's kind of a show me spot for Randy Brown from some perspective, at least a show me spot in relation to the line. Show me you deserve to be a -300 favorite over Trinaldo. And he'll prove that to me if he goes out there and kills Trinaldo. If he does not kill Trinaldo, I think Trinaldo might be able to close the margins in this fight. What do you think, Legs?
Well, with John Knott on the podcast, somebody's got to be barking the big dogs, right?
There we go, right? There's my John spot of the week, right?
Right, exactly. But to me, I don't disagree with you at all. But the last spot for me, backing Trinaldo, was Dwight Grant, and that was a sweat and a half, to be honest. And I didn't think it should have been, quite frankly. I don't know. The guy's been looking old.
One thing I will say, I don't think that fight should have been a split. I think that was bullshit. I thought it was pretty clear 29-28 Trinaldo.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, guys looking old. Durability's not quite there. I think the length and the reach of Randy's gonna probably give him issues. But again, like you mentioned, it's like Randy Brown minus 300. It always gives you like a queasy feeling. Really, it's like I don't know how you'd be laying it, and I don't know how you'd be confident that he does finish Toronto too, because Randy Brown's not like some proven killer. To be completely honest with you.
Yeah, and the last point I'll say, I talked about it a little bit on Half the Battle earlier today. Randy Brown, like this is my general sentiment before I even looked into any of the metrics or read up. I was like, my general sentiment is Randy Brown is a guy you want to back as an undervalued dog. I bet him at plus 116 against Cass Williams in his last fight. Randy Brown has like a 61% ROI as a dog, but only a 14% ROI as a favorite, right? Still positive, all right? That's not bad, right? But my point is that's a big discrepancy, right? Of when you're looking to back a guy like Randy Brown, especially in a price range like this against a tough battle tested motherfucker who I don't think is necessarily going to go out easy. Like I said, it could be done. You know, those Brazilian supplements, you know, ain't working too well anymore. But I think it's completely dog or pass on the money line. I
guess we want to touch on it real quick because I have it pulled up a little bit. Most of these, like the recent lines for Randy Brown, like the last time he was a big favorite, he was a 230 favorite over Jared Gooden.
And Jared Gooden's cut now.
Yeah, before that, minus 150 over Oliveira. And then before that, last time he was a favorite, Nico Price, minus 125.
Got knocked out there.
Yeah, I mean, the last time he was a massive favorite was Eric Montano, where he won by sub, minus 400. Like that was the last time Randy was a massive favorite.
In the UFC.
Yeah, so, yeah.
I'm just saying, like I said, I get it. I get it, though. I do think Randy Brown deserves to be moderately favored in this fight based on, you know, the dynamic that we're playing in that you're looking at a 44-year-old Trinaldo at a size disadvantage, right? Not saying Randy Brown shouldn't be favored. In fact, I think he should be like minus 200. Randy Brown is probably more fair. But I think we're just creeping into that disrespectful territory. And maybe it's kind of just like, you know, a put your money in the bonfire type of spot, but might end up getting involved on old man Trinaldo. But all right, main event, we got Mackenzie Dern taking on Xiaonan. What do you think, Legs?
Well, you know, I'm going back to the well here in Dern 5-round fights. Maybe I'll advise, but you know, I like the under 3.5 rounds. I got it around minus 115. I have a small play there. And I think a lot holds true with the Rodriguez fight. I mean, I think Xiaonan in general, like her defensive grappling, it's not there. I think Dern at some point is going to get this fight to the mat, and I think she gets a finish. Like, I mean, the thing is, I said the same thing for the Rodriguez fight. I get it. She had her opportunities, though, in fair, and it was a similar price tag. So I think it's a good spot personally.
What was the line you got again?
Under 3.5 rounds, minus 115.
See, I think that's a really smart way to go, right? Because, I mean, the books have Dern sub pretty much sitting market wide 110, 120. So it's like,
yeah, it
why would you not play that under there for like 10, 15, 20 cents more? Yeah. Because theoretically, right? Like let's look at this for 2 seconds. Dern covering her price tag and winning is predicated on her largely landing takedowns, getting into dominant positions, most likely finishing, right? Because her inside the distance line is pretty much the same as sub, but we're looking at about 20%, which I still think is honestly a little bit crazy because I still think a large bulk of Dern winning this fight is even probably more than that. Is entrenched on a finish. But what you also get with that under 3.5, I mean, Xiaonan could knock her out. She's pretty cleanly the better striker in the matchup. Dern's been hurt before. Dern's a tough cookie, though. I can see that. But Dern has been hurt before by less strikers than Xiaonan. So you do get that base covered as well. So I think if you're on that side, instead of laying a money line with Mackenzie or parlaying Mackenzie, I think you have a really good look there, Legs, with that under 3.5, because theoretically, I mean, we're looking at 17.5 minutes for more or less Dern to finish, right? That gives you an additional out. So yeah. I think that's a much better way to go than kind of playing this Dern sub inside the distance Dern money line.
And then if that does go over, either one of two things happen. Either Xiaonan's grappling significantly improved, or Dern did fuck all of trying to get the fight to the ground.
That's true. In which Jan is clearly the side anyway. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's why this one's kind of, I want to say it's a tough one for me, right? Because I'm right there with you. Like, it's a 25-minute fight. Dern most likely needs one takedown. The Sparza fight was just not a good look for Jan on bottom. That wasn't that long ago, but it's just hard for me to also completely disregard the fact the couple fights where Dern has not been able to have any sort of grappling success against Well, I shouldn't say that. She did get Rodriguez in tricky spots in that second round, but not finish. But then she could not take down Amanda Ribas, and both girls kind of beat the shit out of her at space. I think it's possible here, so that's why I'm not really running the window to do it. But Dern should probably take her down in summer, because I do think the levels on the floor are pretty massive here. But all right, guys, that is going to do it. Thanks for hanging with the two-man band tonight, myself and Lags. I think we got a pretty fun card on tap. We obviously have that break week next week, so we will be back in 2 weeks. Any closing thoughts for the people, Lags?
No. Hope the Latifi and Oleinik fight. Hope we keep it on. That's about it.
All right. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Like I said, we will be back in 2 weeks. Peace.